17 September 2010. Great Britain's conversion to Catholicism. On Friday, September 17, 2010, Pope Benedict XVI addressed the representatives of British society in Westminster Hall, UK. In the Catholic Herald we read, "The Pope's address in Westminster Hall is one of his most important ever. His address to the Queen will be equally historic, but it's the one at the Palace of Westminster which will have a lasting impact." And Andrew Browne stated regarding this event, "This was the end of the British Empire." So what then did the Pope say? Let's have a look at his speech in Westminster Hall.
In particular, I recall the figure of St. Thomas More, the dilemma which faced More in those difficult times, the perennial question of the relationship between what is owed to Caesar and what is owed to God, allows me the opportunity to reflect with you briefly on the proper place of religious belief within the political process.
Who was Thomas More? Thomas More was an English lawyer, social philosopher, author and statesman. He was an opponent of the Protestant Reformation and an enemy of Martin Luther and William Tyndale. He was beheaded because he held on to the papal supremacy above the kingly throne. As the conflict over supremacy between the papacy and the king reached its apogee, More continued to remain steadfast in supporting the supremacy of the papal throne over that of his king. He would not concede to acknowledge any higher authority than the popes in religious matters. Andrew Browne states, "In all the 4 centuries from Elizabeth I to Elizabeth II, England has been defined as a Protestant nation. For all of those 400 or so years, it would have been unthinkable that a pope should stand in Westminster Hall and praise Sir Thomas More, who died to defend the Pope's sovereignty against the king's." The Pope continued,
And yet, the fundamental questions at stake in Thomas More's trial continue to present themselves in ever-changing terms as new social conditions emerge. Each generation, as it seeks to advance the common good, must ask anew, what are the requirements that governments may reasonably impose upon citizens, and how far do they extend? Appeal to what authority can moral dilemmas be resolved? These questions take us directly to the ethical foundations of civil discourse. If the moral principles underpinning the democratic process are themselves determined by nothing more solid than social consensus, then the fragility of the processes becomes all too evident. Herein lies the real challenge for democracy.
So Benedict XVI asked the question, what are the requirements that governments may reasonably impose upon citizens, and how far do they extend? In the book The Great Controversy, page 201, we read, "To protect liberty of conscience is the duty of the state, and this is the limit of its authority in matters of religion. Every secular government that attempts to regulate or enforce religious observances by civil authority is sacrificing the very principle for which the evangelical Christians so nobly struggled." In the same book, on page 294, we read, "It is the duty of the magistrate to restrain crime, but never to control the conscience. The public or the magistrates may decide what is due from man to man, but when they attempt to prescribe a man's duties to God, they are out of place. Even Napoleon said, 'My dominion ends where that of conscience begins.'" The Pope continued to say,
"The inadequacy of pragmatic, short-term solutions to complex social and ethical problems has been illustrated all too clearly by the recent global financial crisis. There is widespread agreement that the lack of a solid ethical foundation for economic activity has contributed to the grave difficulties now being experienced by millions of people throughout the world.
In other words, the lack of a solid ethical foundation is responsible for the recent global financial crisis. This has been illustrated all too clearly. Ethics will become the defining quality of 21st century business. In Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 and 17, we read, "And he, the lamb-like beast depicted in verse 11, which symbolizes the United States of America, and he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name." What then is the mark of the beast? A computer chip? A tattoo? No. This mark is directly connected to specific ethical norms, as we will see in a few minutes. So the Pope said a failure in providing a solid ethical foundation is responsible for the recent global financial crisis. And this will have consequences, the Pope said.
Just as every economic decision has a moral consequence, so too in the political field. The ethical dimension of policy has far-reaching consequences that no government can afford to ignore.
With this being said, we have to ask ourselves two important questions. What ethical foundation is the Pope referring to, and where is it to be found? And what far-reaching moral consequences in both the economic and political fields is he talking about? Let's see.
The central question at issue then is this: where is the ethical foundation for political choices to be found? The Catholic tradition maintains that the objective norms governing right action are accessible to reason. The role of religion in political debate is to help purify and shed light upon the application of reason to the discovery of objective moral principles. This is why I would suggest the world of reason and the world of faith, the world of secular rationality and the world of religious belief need one another and should not be afraid to enter into profound and ongoing dialogue for the good of our civilization. Religion, in other words, is not a problem for legislators to solve, but a vital contributor to the national conversation.
Ellen G. White, a devoted Christian author, comments, "Any movement in favor of religious legislation is really an act of concession to the papacy, which for so many ages has steadily warred against liberty of conscience. Persecution always follows religious favoritism on the part of secular governments. And now the fence dividing church and state is being broken down.